Bonjour tout le monde. All right, so we are going to do ER verbs. And I know that we did ER verbs right before break. And everyone did really well on the quiz and all that kind of stuff. So let's just go over ER verbs just real quick. Pretty basic, and most of you have it down already. But I just want to do this review to make sure that everybody's on the same page. All right. So ER verbs. The great thing about ER verbs, so at this point, we've only learned one verb, and that's être. And if you guys remember, être doesn't follow any patterns or have any things to help you remember it or anything like that. But when it comes to ER verbs, that is not the case. We have a pattern that follows for practically every single ER verb, with a couple exceptions, of course, as always. So that's the great thing about learning to conjugate ER verbs. And ER verbs are the most prevalent verbs in French. So kind of once you know how to conjugate one, you'll know how to conjugate quite a few verbs. And once again, when we learn être, we're able to say quite a few things. I am a student, I am smart, I am fun, all the things that we learn to say. Now, by adding ER verbs, we're going to be able to say a whole bunch more stuff. All right. So in your online textbook, if you need a refresher on ER verbs, the list is in your book, and you can find that at the beginning of chapter 2 in your textbook. And we didn't get very far through chapter 2, but that's okay. We're going to finish up after we're done doing this review. But ER verbs, for example, we're going to take the verb parler. All right. And parler means to speak. All right, so remember, in its unconjugated form, in its base form, that is the verb's infinitive. So in this case, ER verbs are called ER verbs because they end in ER. Crazy, I know. And the infinitive always means to whatever the verb is, to speak, to think, to like, to travel, whatever it is. In this case, parler means to speak. So this is the infinitive, parler. So now when we conjugate parler, we have a pattern that we have to follow. All right, so the first thing when you conjugate a verb that's very easy is just put down your subject pronouns. And oftentimes when the book presents some verbs to you, this is the format in which they put the verbs down. And it's very easy. I, you, he, she, it. You, you all, they. Or we, you all, they. I don't know where my brain is. All right. So in the case of the je form, actually, let's take a step back. So to get our stem form, we're going to call it, we cut off the ER ending. All right, so we're just left with parle. And then we have some things that we have to add to it for each of the subject pronouns, okay? So when you are taking these ER verbs, you cut off the ER ending, and that gives you your stem form. In this case, we got parle, all right? So let's do this in a different color. Things that we add. I'm going to go ahead and put our stems in here. Okay? So for the first one, you may or may not be able to see. We just add an E. Je parle. For tu, we add ES. Tu parles. For il, elle, on, remember each of these use the same form. Il parle, elle parle, on parle. For this one, once again, we just add an E. So the je and the il form, singular, il singular, look exactly the same. We've got parle with an E, parle with an E, okay? Nous, we add ONS. vous, we add EZ, and il plural, we add ENT. All right? So first, let me do pronunciation, okay? Je parle, tu parles, il parle, elle parle, on parle, nous parlons, vous parlez, il parle, elle parle. And again, il and elle are pronounced the same as this il and elle, so I might have to say il pluriel, il singulier when I'm referencing one or the other. Now, you might have recognized that all of these ones were pronounced the same. Je parle, tu parles, il parle, il parle. All right? So when you're having a speaking conversation with someone, you might need to be a little bit more specific when you're talking by using people's names or something like that, so you know whether you're talking about, you know, the il singular or the il plural or something like that, because they're pronounced exactly the same. When it's written, it's a little bit easier to tell which form you're talking about. And then we have parlons, parler. And another thing that students often fall into the trap of is, remember, we never pronounce the final letters on French words. So this is parler, the ER makes the A sound. This is je parle. This is not je parle. So don't pronounce it like that. Make sure this is parler, je parle. So you do not pronounce that E sound. You basically stop here, parle. All right? Parlons, we do not pronounce the S. And then parler, the EZ, again, just like the ER, makes the A sound. So those two are pronounced the same. All right? And this phenomenon where the je, tu, il, and il plural forms are pronounced the same, we call these boot verbs. And why do we call them boot verbs? Well, it looks a little silly, and who would wear a shoe like this? But if you see, the shape that I've drawn around the verbs kind of looks like a shoe or a boot. So that's why these are called boot verbs. Because what's outside of the boot does not follow the same pattern for pronunciation or for spelling or for what have you. We use the term boot verbs just to talk about this phenomenon of the je, tu, il, and il plural being the same. Sometimes it might be in spelling, sometimes it might be in pronunciation, so make sure you keep an ear out for that one, okay? So, like I said, ER verbs, pretty straightforward and easy to remember. Every ER verb has its own meaning, so you definitely have to practice with the meaning. Again, strongly recommend flashcards. They're very helpful for you. Maybe flashcards don't work for you. You definitely need to find a study method that does work for you, whether it's writing it 5 times or making flashcards or having a conversation with a friend that's in class or something, having a conversation with me. But like I said, you guys have a pretty good understanding of ER verbs, so I'm not too worried about any of this. We will probably have another quiz still on this topic just to make sure everybody's on the same page and refresh your memory, since it's been about a month since we've been in school. All right, so if you guys have any questions, as always, just let me know. Au revoir.